After our survey last night of various states in varying states of readiness for Tuesday's elections, it took less than 24 hours for more problems to come to light. Our number 4 story on the countdown tonight, welcome to the list, Tennessee, where the GOP says several electronic voting cards have disappeared, opening the door to voter fraud there. And there's last-minute confusion in several states where new laws have gone into effect ostensibly to combat fraud, but allegedly to also impose such tight restrictions as to suppress voting by the poor and minorities. MSNBC's David Schuster joins us. We'll get to this call from the military newspapers for Secretary Rumsfeld's ouster in a moment. First, the details on the looming computer nightmare. David, good evening.
Keith, good evening to you. The poor, minorities, the elderly, these are groups that tend to be Democrats. They are also groups that are more likely than not, in many cases, not to have a driver's license, maybe because they don't drive, they don't own a car. But this year, a dozen different states are requiring voters on Tuesday to have some sort of form of voter identification. And in Indiana, for example, they're actually requiring a photo identification itself. So if you don't have a car in Indiana, you don't work for the state, and you don't have some sort of form of identification, you're in for trouble on Tuesday. And in Indiana in particular, there are 3 House races that are awfully close that have precincts with minorities, the elderly, or people who may not drive, and those precincts, of course, could be crucial in determining the outcome. In addition, Keith, we're already getting some anecdotal evidence of major problems with absentee ballots as far as absentee ballots being challenged. We're also getting reports in a dozen different states now of campaign workers being urged to aggressively challenge voters at the polls if there's any sort of suggestion of fraud. In Maryland, for example, there was a bitter debate today between the senatorial candidates about a Republican voter guide that urged campaign workers to try and challenge voters, try to challenge people at the polls, the judges, if there's any sort of indication. It doesn't spell out what an indication of fraud would be. It just says that people ought to be aggressive. In the midst of all of this and the charges of voter suppression efforts that are flying back and forth, you now already have problems with some of the electronic voting machines. Officials in Tennessee confirmed that a dozen cards that authorize the voting machines to go on have gone missing. And even though officials say that these cards have been deactivated, they could easily be reactivated with a trip to the computer store. The problem is this could cause massive fraud both with the voting machines and the people who show up to the polls.